Let's talk about some things to keep in mind as you get ready and take your law school exams. First, you need to understand there are two big components to doing well on law school exams. First, knowledge. You know that one. It's the memorization of the endless list of rules you spit out at the start of each exam answer. But just as important, if not more important, is the skill. Really the art of exam taking. The skill to take exams involves a few things. The knack for applying specific facts to elements of a rule, the ability to act quick under hard time pressures, organization, time management, as well as other skills we'll cover. I'm going to talk you through how to get the knowledge quickly and efficiently, and more importantly, how to develop these skills. So let's talk about knowledge first. To prepare for law school exams, you must memorize a massive amount of information. Dozens, if not hundreds, of rules, rule elements, and lessons from cases in class. In order to make this process manageable, I suggest you take every rule you're responsible for on your exams and turn it into what I call a law exam tool. In making each tool, you want to turn your rule statements into a simple checklist of elements that you can easily apply. Second, you want to make sure your elements contain all the various nuances about how to meet the element gathered from your cases and classes. Third, you want to make sure that you condense these checklists down into the simplest, clearest form possible. And really, this is your main job as an attorney, so learn it well now. Taking complex rules, stripping them down into the essence so you can figure out how to apply them. So now let's look at an example of how to make a law exam tool. First, you start out with the black letter elements of each rule you're responsible for. So try this out. What are the black letter elements of battery? Battery is the intentional contact with another that is harmful or offensive. These black letter rules are easy to find. Many professors will give them to you. Your casebook will usually give them to you. But then we take these elements and we add to them what we learned from the cases and classes. So here, we don't just say intent. We say it's intending the contact. That's what the intent element means. It's not just contact, but you've learned, tell you it's contact with the plaintiff or an intimate object the plaintiff's holding, like a cane or a plate. The cases would teach you that it's not just harmful contact, but it's whether it's offensive to a reasonable person. Note that these elements are numbered. You simply take one at a time and analyze whether the element is established. Then you move to the next one. Each element has everything you learned about these elements in class and your assigned cases. After you've made all of your tools, you need to memorize them. There are a lot of great ways to memorize, and the key is to experiment until you find the most effective method for you. Some common ways that many people find effective include writing out your lists of tools, recording your outline verbally so you can play it back at the gym while you're driving, etc., whiteboarding out your rules, using flashcards, taking practice exams, etc. I will emphasize that many students have success recording their outlines verbally and then playing it back. Both the act of recording the audio and then listening back to them can be very effective. One method you always want to use in memorizing is the tree method. The tree method is probably somewhat familiar to you, if not in name. The method leverages the way the human brain memorizes information, namely making associations. We remember information by figuring out how it relates to other information we already know. We categorize, label, and file away information. We can use this to effectively memorize law exam tools. So the tree method means creating a series of lists to help you create these associations between the rules and the rule elements. A lot of it is traditional outlining, but there are some differences. So first, start with a list of the major categories in each of your classes. So for torts, your categories may be intentional torts, negligence, vicarious liability, strict liability, and remedies. Then, after that list, you make longer lists of the sub-rules or tools in each category. So your negligence list might include each of the sub-rules within negligence that you might apply, causation, damages, etc. Then you have the final lists, which are your actual legal tools. By creating these lists and remembering each, you're building a tree in your mind that allows you to access information incredibly quickly on the exam. So now let's talk about the skills you need to hone to succeed on exams. You need to know how to apply the rules to facts, In other words, how to apply your legal tools. You need to know how to use specific facts, which is the key to high-scoring answers, and you need to know how to be organized. What I'm going to give you now is a simple, step-by-step process to do each of these things. This process was developed working with hundreds of law students from around the country in a number of law schools. This process has been extremely successful even with students that suffer from extreme anxiety. The first step is knowing that there are two parts to answering a law exam, and you cannot ignore either. There's the outlining phase, and there's the writing phase. The outlining phase is by far the most important of these phases, so we'll spend more time focusing on that. You should be spending at least half your time on outline, preferably in handwriting on scratch paper. During your outlining stage, you should read the call of the question. This will tell you if the professors have narrowed the type of law you need to think about. So for an example, your professor may say what intentional torts could be brought, and then you don't have to worry about the other categories. Then you need to figure out what are called conflict pairs. A conflict pair is a pair of people or entities that could potentially bring claims against each other. American law is always binary, party A versus party B. Now, you may have seen a case where party A brings claims against parties B, C, D, but every claim will rise or fall against two individual parties. So you want to make sure you outline one conflict pair at a time. Some questions only have one conflict pair, one plaintiff and one defendant, or one prosecutor and one defendant. But many questions, especially subjects like torts, will have many different parties, and keeping each pair of parties distinct is incredibly helpful when we get to the writing section. Next, you need to read the hypothetical quickly for one purpose: to identify all the potential legal tools or rules that might be raised by the parties. At this stage, be sure to use your tree list to double check that you've identified every possible legal tool that any party could raise. So quickly run through your major categories, and then any major categories that are possibly relevant, run through your sub-legal rules. Then you are going to quickly write down your legal tool elements. This is that checklist you've memorized. Writing this element checklist out is incredibly important. Do not ignore it. Finally, you take one party at a time, one element of each legal tool at a time, and you gather every specific fact that party could use to show the element is met or not met. This is the essence of the law school exam answer: identifying the specific facts. What you were really doing is matching the specific facts the professor chose to put in the hypothetical with the legal tool it was meant to fit under. It's much like one of those matching games you might have done when you were a child, matching items from one column by drawing a line to items in another column. Pretend you are a lawyer. What specific facts can you use? Make sure you use common sense. Then we get to the writing phase. You are just going to regurgitate your outline here, really, so it should be stress-free at this point. Label each legal tool you are applying, including the conflict pair. Write down your specific checklist of elements that you've memorized, and then take one element at a time, one paragraph at a time, and discuss every specific fact party A can raise to argue the tool is met or the element is met, and then every specific fact the responding party can use to show that element's not met. Finish up with a conclusion that cites a couple key facts from your analysis. Doesn't really matter which, as long as it makes sense. Now let's look at an example. First, let's look at how we might outline this. Note the conflict pair at the top. We only have one here, Paul versus David. If Paul had threw the book at others, we would need to make an outline for additional conflict pairs. Note that on the left, we have the legal tool, the checklist of elements we memorized. Then we have the specific facts each party will use to argue each element is met or not met. Here's what it looks written out. We have the heading with the conflict pair and legal tool. Then we have the checklist of elements. Then we have one paragraph, one element at a time, telling the professor what specific facts we spotted, she included, for that element. Finally, the question is, how do you develop each of these discrete skills we just talked about? You need to do a couple things. First, start building your law exam tool list from day one, and revise your tool list throughout the semester. Spend substantial time every single week working on your law exam tools, condensing them into comprehensive but concise checklists. This is where most of the effort comes in law school. Spending time with the rules, the cases, to figure out how you apply them on exams. Law students frequently make the mistake of reading cases without considering how those cases can be used on the exam. This process of creating checklists of elements from your cases forces you to think about how that case can be used in different factual scenarios. Also, make sure you take lots of practice exams throughout the semester. The only way to get good at the matching up game is to practice a lot. Finally, stick to a schedule to develop these skills. Even if you're not a schedule person, schedules are important in law school. By scheduling your tool building and practicing time each week, you will become a successful law school exam taker.